All right. Hello. My name's Andrea, or Drea for short. Today is Saturday, October 24th, 2020, and this is episode 5 of the Drea's Hook podcast. If you're joining me live here on Instagram, welcome. If you're catching the replay on IGTV, welcome. And if you're watching this on YouTube, welcome. So as always, we have a lot to talk about, so I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into it. But first, before I get too far into my actual whips and everything, I do have a few announcements that I would like to make here at the beginning. So first of all, last week we did not have a podcast. I decided to do something a little bit different and do what I call a crochet with me or make with me episode. Very long story short, I just didn't have the energy or the motivation to do all the preparation that goes into doing a regular podcast. So I decided to do something a little bit more laid back, where I just got in here on Instagram Live, same time, same place, and just kind of chatted with y'all and crocheted. So I had a lot of fun. It went a lot better than I was expecting it to. So if you haven't seen that yet, the replay is on IGTV and YouTube, and it was great. And I would love you if you would check it out. It was a lot of fun. I don't know how often I'm going to do things like that, but I really do kind of like that format. And it was a lot of fun and I enjoyed it. So it is something that I'd like to do again. But I don't know how frequently I'd be able to do that because I don't want it to replace the podcast. I'd like to do both, but it's going to take me a while before I kind of get to a place where I'm able to manage my time to do 2 different series basically. So for now, it's kind of just going to be a stand-in for weeks where I can't or won't do the podcast. So definitely keep an eye out for more crochet with me's or hopefully eventually knit with me's in the future. Second announcement, next Saturday is October 31st, which is Halloween, and it seemed like a lot of people were really in favor of me doing something special for the Halloween episode. So I did want to do something very special and kind of have maybe a horror story time thing, but I didn't have enough time to put that together, but I will be in costume. So episode 6 is going to be just like all of our other episodes, except I will be in costume. So it should be a lot of fun, and I have my costume already, and it's really cute. I'm not going to say what it is because I want there to be that element of surprise. So definitely be sure to tune in to episode 6, 1 p.m. Central, on October 31st to see what my Halloween costume is. And I realize that if you usually watch the podcast on YouTube, it doesn't go up until Sunday, so it might be November 1st by the time you see it, but we do what we can. It's fine. Everything's fine. So yeah, I'm really excited about the Halloween episode, and hopefully next year I can do something that's a little bit more planned out for Halloween and any other holidays that we have coming up. So yeah. And then my last announcement that I wanted to make is I am planning on starting a email list for the podcast because the past few weeks I've been sending out emails to my normal email list about the podcast, and I acknowledge the fact that not everybody on that main email list is necessarily interested in the podcast. It's not for everyone. I totally understand and respect that, but it's a little bit easier for me to push out reminders through email than it is here on social media for reasons, mostly because I tend to ramble a lot. But y'all know this by now. We're 5 episodes in. Y'all know how much I talk. So yeah, I'm planning on starting a separate email list for the podcast. So if you're wanting to get reminders about when the episode goes up, and then maybe a midweek reminder, because I know sometimes in the hustle and bustle of life, we forget to watch things or do things that we say we're gonna watch or do. So if you're interested in that, definitely keep an eye out for that. So that way, if you're not interested in that, you're not getting emails from me every week about the podcast, because I totally understand that you might not want that. Okay, so now that all of the announcements are over, we can finally get into some yarny stuff. So I have actually started a new project. Well, I haven't quite started it yet. I've gauge swatched for it, and it is a pattern test. So I am pattern testing the Selene Cardigan by Leroo Crochet. and I will be using Knit Picks / We Crochet Swish DK. It's a 100% superwash merino. So there were several different options that we could do for the pattern test in terms of colors. So we could either do the entire cardigan in one color, or we could do 2 colors where like the body's in one color and then the ribbing and the pockets are in a different color as an accent color, or we could do a 3-color fade. So I've always wanted to make something that had a fade, so I opted to do the 3-color fade. And these are my colors. We're going nice and neutral, nice and gray. I absolutely love gray to wear for like my cardigans and things like that. So I knew that I needed to make this in gray. So this lighter gray is called Dove Heather. And then the second gray is called Marble Heather. And then the third gray is called Cobblestone Heather. So yeah, I'm really excited about this fade. So the cardigan is worked bottom up. So we'll be starting with the Cobblestone Heather because I want it, if you're looking at it top down, I want it to fade from light to dark. So since it's bottom up, I need to start with the Cobblestone Heather. I haven't actually started the cardigan yet because since it's a cardigan, obviously that starting chain is very long, and I've talked about this before, but when it comes to counting stitches, I have a very short attention span. So I like to place stitch markers every like 10 or 20 stitches, and all of my stitch markers are have either like walked away, dropped off the face of the earth, or they're tied up in one of the many other projects that I'm working on. So I actually ordered some more stitch markers, and they're supposed to be here on Wednesday, I think. So I will be starting the project on Wednesday, hopefully. But I did go ahead and do my gauge swatch. So you can kind of see it has a very nice texture, and this Swish DK yarn is super soft and it has like a lot of drape. So this gauge swatch is blocked, and I had to go down a couple of hook sizes from what the designer used, but I always do. I'm a pretty loose crocheter. And then I also have a tiny little gauge swatch for the ribbing. Isn't it cute? It's so cute. So yeah, 2 different gauge swatches, 2 different hook sizes. So we are all set on gauge, and yeah, just waiting for the stitch markers to get here, and then I'll go ahead and get started on that. Thankfully, this pattern test has a really like generous deadline. It's not due until like late January, but I do try to like stay on top of my pattern tests, just because time gets away for me, and like, you know, things come up, like maybe I didn't order enough yarn, or you know, obviously it's a pattern test, so there could be mistakes in the pattern that might take a little longer to fix and things like that. So even though I have plenty of time for the pattern test, I do want to go ahead and get started on it as soon as possible so that I can account for all those little things that might go wrong. Same here with the stitch counting. Yeah, I think that putting the stitch markers every few stitches really helps with those long starting chains or foundation rows. Ooh, that drape. Yeah, it has really good drape. So I'm really excited about this cardigan. I think it's dense enough to where it's going to be like nice and warm, and especially since it's wool. But I do like that it's drape because I don't want to be wearing like a piece of cardboard, basically. So it'll be really nice once the whole thing is done. So I'm really excited about it. I've been wanting to crochet a cardigan for a while, so I'm really glad that I got picked for this test. So yeah, that is the Selene cardigan. Hopefully I will have more updates on that in episode 6. So now it's time to move on to what I've primarily been working on the past few weeks, and that is the Holiday Tunisian Crochet Along, or TCAL, being hosted by TL Yarn Crafts. So we are on week 3 of 6 right now. Week 4 starts on Monday, and I am on track. I have one more square that I'm supposed to complete for week 3, so as long as I finish that by Monday, we'll be good to go. But since we skipped the podcast last week, I have a lot of squares to talk about today. Kind of see this big stack here. So we're gonna go through all of these. And I will like put my little disclaimer, I've not woven in the ends, I've not blocked these squares. So there's a lot going on in this general area. And also, just for the sake of time, I'm not going to discuss squares that I previously discussed. So if you're interested in seeing the first, I think 3 squares that I did, definitely be sure to check out episode 4 because I talk about those squares in detail there. But we don't have time for all that today. So before I get into the squares though, I want to go over the yarn that I'm using. So I am using We Crochet / Knit Picks Brava worsted yarn, 100% acrylic, size 4 yarn, and this blanket is made in 4 colors. So my color A is Mulberry, color B is Caution, color C is Cream, and color D is Silver. So let me just hold these all up together. So that is the full color palette, and I just love it. I can't wait to put the entire blanket together. So these colors aren't all used in the same quantity. The cream and silver are kind of our main colors, and then the mulberry and caution are kind of acting more as accent colors. So yeah, we have a pretty good balance between like bold and bright and like more neutral, and it looks pretty good. I was a little nervous about especially the caution and the mulberry together, but it is coming along very nicely. I'll show y'all in a minute. Alrighty, so getting into our squares. So this square is from week 1. When I talked about it in episode 4, I had barely started on it, but it is now complete. So this is the nope. It's not the brick stitch. There's another square called brick stitch. This is the block stitch square, block and brick. And I'll hold them up side by side later, so you'll be able to see why I got confused. So yeah, I really like this square. We've got the caution and the silver together, and it's a pretty simple square, worked up pretty quickly. You kind of get this block or grid effect by these post stitches here in the silver, and then the rows in between are just Tunisian simple stitch, which is like the most basic stitch in Tunisian crochet. So yeah, it looks harder than it was, I think. I like things that really look complicated, but in reality aren't all that difficult at all. So yeah, this is definitely one of my favorite squares that I've made so far. All right, the next square is called the home square. So this involved stranded color work, or let me think. I always get like the color work names confused. So tapestry is when you like crochet over it, and then intarsia is when you have the multiple balls. So this would be like Fair Isle color work, I guess. So yeah, it's spelled home, and I really hate the fact that this is mirrored right now, but I can't really do anything about that. But in real life, if you look at it straight on, it's going the right way, I promise. So it says home, H-O-M-E, and if you turn it around, you can see how I floated the colors across the back. So this was my first time doing any sort of stranded color work in any craft, like crochet or Tunisian crochet or knit. And I was a little nervous, but it turned out okay. At the beginning, it was going really slow because I was kind of having a hard time managing my yarn and keeping it from getting tangled and things like that. But I eventually kind of got into a rhythm, and it went pretty quickly after that. But yeah, I was worried because this was the first square of week 2, and I was like, man, I'm gonna spend the entire week working on this one square, and I'm gonna be really behind. But I was eventually able to figure it out, and I really like how it turned out. So I know some people who are doing the T-cal decided to change their design. So I know somebody did, instead of the O here, they did like a little heart. And then somebody spelled love instead of home. But I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just gonna work the pattern as written. And it turned out great. I'm really happy with how this turned out. It's a little thick where the color work is, since we're floating, but I think it'll block out really nicely and look nice with all of the other squares. So yeah, this is the home square. All right, next square is called the wait, what's the right side? I think this is the right side. This square is called the Lacy Shells square. So called because, let me try to get this on camera. You can kind of see that we've got like this shell pattern going on a little bit. And of course it's lacy. So this square is pretty interesting because the way that you get this kind of lacy effect is on the return pass. So if you're not familiar with Tunisian crochet, you're not like turning your work back and forth. Your work is always facing on the right side. So each row is kind of broken up into two parts. So on your first part of the row, you're working from right to left and you're kind of picking up stitches as you go along the row. So then at the end of the row, you have all of these loops on your hook. So that's why you need like a really long hook or like a hook that has a cord at the end of it so that you can fit all the stitches. And then you work your way from left to right on what's called the return pass. And like 99% of the time, your return pass is exactly the same, where you chain one and then you yarn over and pull through two loops. And you keep doing that until you get all the way back to the other end of the row. But for this lacy shell square, the return pass was actually different. So it involved, I don't remember the pattern exactly, but I think you would like chain 4 and then pull through 6 loops on the hook or something to that effect. So that's why you're able to get this kind of lace pattern, and that's where all the gaps came through. And then on the first part of the row, you're actually working into the chain stitches. I don't know if you can see that. Camera's acting up again. But yeah, this, all in all, this square had a pretty unconventional construction. I wasn't aware that you could do a different type of return pass until I worked this square up, but it looks really nice. It's very light and airy. I'm not a huge lace person in general. I tend to like stitch patterns that are a little bit more dense and solid, but this looks really nice, and I think it'll look really nice with the rest of the blanket. Obviously, it needs to be blocked like all of these squares do, but I promise it's going to be more square instead of like this rectangle. I followed the instructions, I promise. I promise. So yeah, that is the lacy shells square. Next square, and this is another personal favorite of mine, is called the mitered square. So this one looks really cool, especially in these colors. It looks kind of like retro and like geometric, and that is right up my alley. So the construction for this square, so whenever Tony would talk about it, she would say that you were like changing directions, and I was super intrigued by that because, like I just explained, you don't really change directions in Tunisian crochet. So I was really excited to do this square and see what she meant by that. So how this square is worked essentially is you're starting on the long edge. So if we're looking at this like silver row that keeps rolling up on me, all of this go around the corner is one row. So instead of starting with like 35 stitches, we start it with like 70 stitches. And the way you kind of get like this corner is by Tunisian simple stitch 3 together. Sorry, I'm struggling today. So yeah, basically doing a type of decrease in the middle. And so that's how you get that corner, and then eventually the rows get shorter and shorter until you work to this corner. So very interesting construction. This one was a lot of fun to work out. I really like constructions where the rows start long and then eventually decrease, because then it's like it starts off slow but then it gets faster and faster, and I really like that kind of like satisfaction of like the rows getting shorter and everything. And I think that's also why like the corner to corner type construction in general, like working until the rows are really long and then coming back in. I really like the decreasing part of that. But anyway, so this one also taught me that eventually I'm probably going to need to invest in some better hooks. Let's see, do I have my Tunisian hook over here? Let me show y'all. So the hooks that I've been using for Tunisian crochet, because I wasn't really wanting to make like a huge investment in a fancy Tunisian crochet hook set. They can get pretty expensive, $50, $100 even, and that's quite the investment. And at this time I wasn't really completely sold on Tunisian crochet. I didn't know if I was going to like it. I obviously love it now, but I kind of wanted to do something a little cheaper to start off with, and then if I like the craft I would invest in something later. So this is the hook set that I've been using. I got it pretty cheap on Amazon. It was like 12 different sized hooks for maybe like $12 or $13. So that's like $1 per hook. So super inexpensive. They're made of bamboo, but it's like, I forget what the word is for it, but it's kind of like treated bamboo. And then the part that's been irking me is the cord is just this like hollow plastic. So yeah, a very inexpensive hook set. So for most of the other squares, like I said, the starting chain was between 35 and 45 stitches. So when you had all of the loops on the hook, it would go a little bit onto the cord, but most of the stitches would still be on the actual hook part. With this mitered square one, like I said, it started with like 70 something stitches, and so you had more loops that needed to be on this cord, and so that was kind of weighing it down. And what was really bothering me, you can see it now, is that since this is hollow plastic, it would bend and the stitches would actually get caught. And so that was very irksome when I was working on this square. And so I was like, okay, after this project is over, I'm going to need to get a better Tunisian crochet hook set, because I have been looking at like some larger projects like blankets and garments and things that would have even more stitches, and that just kind of sounds like a pain to constantly have to be adjusting your stitches to get past this cheap cord. So I need a hook set with a better cord than this. So if you're into Tunisian crochet and you have any recommendations for a nice Tunisian crochet hook set, definitely let me know, because I will be in the market for that soon. Maybe it'll be my Christmas present to myself. I don't know. So yeah, I need better hooks is the long story short. But that's really the only major issue I've had with these hooks. On one of the other size hooks I had to like the wood wasn't completely sanded down, so the stitches were getting caught on that as well. So like I took a nail file and sanded that down. Yeah, it's a pretty good starter set, I would say. Like I said, it's like 12 hooks, and I think the sizes range from 3.5 millimeters to 10 millimeters, so you can make most things with this set. But yeah, it's just the cord. The cord is really bothering me. The top that you're wearing, did you design it? It looks lovely. No, I did not design this. This was a pattern test that I did earlier this year. So this is the Favorite Baseball Raglan by Stephanie Aaron. And And the yarn is Leroo Cotton DK. My main color is Partly Cloudy, and the accent color is What Lurks in the Shadows. So nope, not talented enough to design this, unfortunately, but yeah, I really like this top, and I wear it quite a bit. And since it's a DK weight, it's a little, it's not like super heavy, but it's good for like a transitional piece, even though it's short sleeve, because I live in a warmer climate and there's really no need for big bulky sweaters here. Although it's like in the low 50s, it was in the low 50s this morning, like it was cold. So that was very exciting. Let's see. I highly recommend watching Tony's videos where she reviews Tunisian hooks. I believe there are 2 videos about Tunisian hooks. Yes, I think I've seen those before. I'm definitely gonna have to go back and rewatch those because she had some pretty good recommendations. And actually, I think these hooks that I'm using now were recommended by her as well as kind of like more budget-friendly options if you're not wanting to make that huge investment all the way. So yeah, I definitely trust Tony when it comes to tools that you need for Tunisian crochet. So I'm probably gonna end up having to go back and rewatch those videos and make a decision from there. All right, I need some water. All right, so those were all, no, those were not all of the week 2 squares, never mind. One more square from week 2. So this is the lattice stitch square. Looks very nice, but oh my gosh, this square took forever to make. It is such a slow workup. Like I was working on it at like a crochet or knit night last weekend, and it just seemed like it took forever. I was like, we were like an hour into it and I had only done like an inch, and these squares are like 12 by 12 inches. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is taking forever. But once it's done, and it looks very nice. It's very like dense and squishy, but it has a very nice texture, very subtle, and it will go well with everything else. So yeah, this is the lattice stitch square. Okay, so now we're done with the week 2 squares. So moving on to week 3. So for some reason, color A wasn't introduced until the week 3 squares. And that was kind of a bummer because, like I said, my color A is that gorgeous purple called Mulberry. And so I was like really itching to use it. And I didn't get a chance to use it until week 3. But I was so glad when I finally did. So this is the brick stitch square. So I misspoke earlier because this is the block stitch square and this is the brick stitch square. So I got the names confused, but you can kind of tell how this one is more blockish and this is more brickish, if you will. So, and this is also a good chance to see all 4 of the colors together. Let's see. This one has a lot of drape. Like I'm having a hard time holding it in one hand so you can kind of see the whole thing. But yeah, all 4 colors together in a similar motif. And I just think it looks great. I can't wait to see the entire blanket laid out. And y'all know that I really like brick type patterns. I have filet crochet patterns that are basically in a brick pattern. So this is probably one of my favorite squares to date. Favorite stitch pattern, favorite color. I just love it. So yeah, the brick stitch square and the block stitch square actually have very similar constructions where they both use like these post stitches to kind of get that effect. But these post stitches are a row shorter than the ones used in the block stitch square. So yeah, this one was really fun, worked up very quickly. And yeah, this is probably like my favorite one so far. I feel like I've said that like 3 times, but I really, really like this one. Honestly, I would like make an entire blanket in this stitch and just like change the colors. I think that would be really cool. And honestly, you could do that with any of these squares in this tea cowl. Whether you wanted to do something that was like a little bit more low texture and really like focus on the different colors, or like some of these squares are really like high texture. The world is your oyster when it comes to these squares in the tea cowl. All right, and then the next square, oh, by the way, we're on week 3 now, so this was the first square of week 3. So these are squares that I did this week. So the next square is the wave stitch square. And so this one's a lot of fun. So 3 different colors. I think this is the first square that we had that uses 3 different colors, and I think it looks really nice. I really like the way that these colors look together. And then we're using stitches of different heights to get this kind of wave pattern. So we're using a Tunisian slip stitch, Tunisian simple stitch, and Tunisian double crochet are the kind of, the double crochet is like the taller stitch that you see in here. So yeah, this one was a lot of fun as well. Works it really quickly. Things got a little hairy with having 3 balls of yarn attached at the same time because we just carried the yarn up the row. You can kind of see on the wrong side how I carried the yarn up. So things got a little tangled at times, but it wasn't bad at all. And also, can we just talk about how this looks on the back too? I really like how, like, Tunisian crochet isn't reversible by any means, but it looks really cool on the back as well. Like this square on the back, like that's cool. Like I like that design. And like this one too. Sorry, I'm just gonna show like the backs of all of these. And then I already showed like the float one. Lacy Shells is pretty close to being reversible. Actually, I think this one is reversible. No, it's not. You can tell that this is the wrong side, but it looks pretty close to being reversible. So this is the right side. This is the wrong side. And then the mitered square looks pretty good on the back as well. Right side, wrong side. And then this is the lattice stitch, right side, wrong side. So yeah, Tunisian crochet looks really cool on the wrong side as well. Anyway, so yeah, wave stitch, 3 colors, worked up pretty quickly since the Tunisian double crochet stitch is kind of tall. And yeah, this is another favorite of mine. Honestly, any of the squares that have the purple in them are probably going to be among my favorites. Just because purple's my favorite color and I had to wait so long to be able to use it. So that's the Tunisian wave stitch. And so the last square that I have completed is the Tunisian knit stitch square. Pretty simple, very nice. I was already familiar with Tunisian knit stitch before I started on this blanket because this is a stitch that gets used quite a bit. I know a lot of people like Tunisian crochet in general because they consider it to be a kind of halfway point between crocheting and knitting. So if you're a crocheter who has trouble with knitting or just isn't interested in learning how to knit, then Tunisian crochet is kind of a good compromise. So this really does look a lot like a knitted stockinette stitch, and since we're talking about the wrong side, the back actually does look very similar to reverse stockinette. So this is probably as close to a knit stitch that's not knitting that you're gonna get, because I know there are a lot of stitches in standard crochet that look a lot like knitting, but this one like really looks a lot like knitting. So it's probably as close as you're going to get. Looks so nice and uniform. Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I have really been trying to focus on my tension in Tunisian crochet because I've found that Tunisian crochet isn't really that forgiving if you have tension issues. And so really have to like pay close attention to that. And I mean, there are still a couple in here. Like looking at this, I can kind of see some of these stitches look a little off, but I think for the most part, I'm definitely improving in that area. What was I saying? So yeah, this fabric looks like knit stitch, but I'm not like an expert at knitting by any means. I'm a newbie knitter, but I know enough about knitting to know that if I were to use the same yarn on 6.5mm needles, because the hook I'm using is 6.5mm, and did like a stockinette stitch, the fabric would be a lot like thinner and like airier. So it looks like knitting, but I would argue that it wouldn't necessarily perform like knitting because this fabric is very thick. And this Tunisian knit stitch is a yarn eater. I used quite a bit of yarn on this square. I'm not entirely sure how much, but it's a yarn eater for sure. So yeah, that's just something to keep in mind. Like it looks like knitting, but it might not necessarily act like knitting. And so I think that that's an important distinction to make as well. Yeah, absolutely. So I guess that was referring to the fact that knitting, holding all other things equal, would perform a little differently than Tunisian crochet. All right, some water. All right, and then my last square that I wanted to show, this square is in progress, and it is the final square of week 3. So once I finish this one, I will be caught up. This is the arrowhead stitch. So you can kind of see how it has these little V's that kind of look like arrowheads. So I guess that's why it's called that. And yeah, this one is, she said that it was kind of a variation on the mesh stitch. So I can kind of see how it's a little bit airy. It's not rolling up as badly as some of these other squares, and it works up very quickly. So I'm really actually gonna try to finish this up tonight if I can, because it seems like it works up pretty quickly. So if I'm able to do that, I will be all caught up on week 3. So looking ahead to week 4, the squares that are coming in week 4 are the mesh stitch, baubles, meandering cables, and the full stitch. So we're gonna get baubles and cables next week. I'm really nervous about the cables, truth be told. I've never done cables in any craft, so it's definitely gonna be interesting. It's gonna be interesting for sure. So definitely make sure to come back next week because I'm sure I'll have some thoughts on that, and we'll see how it goes. Sorry, I came in late, but is this a blanket you're working on? Maybe the one from TL Yarn Crafts. Yes, exactly. So this is TL Yarn Crafts Holiday Tunisian Crochet Along. So it's on week 3 of 6 right now. And the arrowhead stitch square that I just showed is the last square of week 3. So I'm keeping up with the pace pretty well. But yeah, I'm really excited to get them all blocked and seamed together and everything because I think it'll look really nice once it's all laid out. Great job on the arrowhead stitch. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I really like how it's looking so far. And I really like Bravo worsted yarn. It has pretty good stitch definition. So I'm glad that it's doing all of these awesome stitch patterns justice. Alrighty, so that is all that I have to say about the holiday tea cow. I know that was quite a lot. Okay, so do I have time to talk about this next thing? I think I do. I'm just gonna go for it. Get some water first. It's so hard to figure out how long it's going to take me to talk about certain projects. So we are still learning. All right, so the next project I'm working on isn't technically like a fiber arts project. It's a resource that I've been working on for a while now, and it's called, working title, the Crochet Pattern Skill Level Finder. And it's basically going to be a resource to help designers or anybody else who's interested figure out how to rate the difficulty of their designs. So basically, the last conundrum that I ran into is whether or not I should include some questions on, or I guess, questions. We'll go with questions. Some questions on the resource related to the size of the project. Yes, the project. I'm a little tired today, y'all. Sorry. So I have been kind of asking some questions in my stories to kind of figure out what everybody thought about that. So I asked a couple weeks ago 2 different questions. The first question was, does the size of a project contribute to the overall difficulty of it? And then the second question was taking like 2 projects, a like single crochet washcloth and a single crochet blanket. Which one's more difficult, or are they the same difficulty? So for the first question, 61% of people said no, the size of a project does not contribute to the difficulty, and 39% said yes, it does. So I've mentioned this before, but since these Instagram polls have such a small sample size, I really consider anything that's a narrower margin than like a 65-35 to be kind of a toss-up to where it could go either way. So technically, more people are saying no, it doesn't matter, than people who are saying yes, it does matter. But it's kind of too close for me to be like, it's definitely no. So, sounds awesome, so needed. Yeah, I know that like trying to figure out what difficulty a pattern is can be difficult because there's so many factors at play. So I hope that this is successful and that it gives people some clarity. And I'm honestly learning a lot just by trying to put it together as well. All right, so then regarding the second question, the washcloth versus the blanket, 64% of people said that they would be the same difficulty, 33% said that the blanket would be more difficult, and 3% said that the washcloth would be more difficult. So those numbers match up pretty well with the first question, kind of like a 60-40 split. And it looks like the consensus is that like if size does contribute to the difficulty of a pattern, then the larger the project is, the more difficult it is. Let's see, counting the number of stitches for a blanket was challenging for me when I was a beginner. Shoot, it's challenging for me now, and I'm like intermediate advanced. So yeah, that's definitely something that I that was kind of like my motivation for asking the question, because I think that counting stitches, especially if you're more of a beginner and you're not as familiar with like what the stitches look like and things like that, counting to 300, for example, is a lot more difficult than counting to 20. So that is something that I kind of wanted to account for when I asked that question. So yeah, based on those results, I'm still a little torn on whether I need to include questions about size on the quiz, because I understand where people are coming from, that the size wouldn't necessarily make it more difficult, because I had someone point out to me that if you have, for example, a blanket that's graded for different sizes from like a lovey all the way up to a king size blanket, the designer isn't going to say, okay, the lovey is a advanced beginner difficulty, but the king size is intermediate simply because it's bigger. No, like the entire pattern is going to be rated 1 difficulty. So I definitely understand that. Let's see, that's a good consideration. I didn't really think it would be a difference in difficulty, but now seeing this, it probably is a bit more difficult. Yeah, and I think what this all comes down to is the perceived difficulty of something versus the technical difficulty of something. So going back to the washcloth and the blanket example, if they're using the same stitches, no, it's technically not more difficult. If both projects are all single crochet, then the only skills you need to know to make that blanket are a chain and a single crochet, right? But I think there's kind of like a psychological thing. And like, I do not work in the mental health field. I don't know anything about this, but I think that there's like a psychological thing that makes you think that a larger project is more difficult than a smaller project. And then there's also like other factors at play, like stamina. You know, when people are first learning how to crochet, a washcloth or like a dishcloth is often the first thing that's recommended for a beginner to make, because just jumping in and making like a blanket or like a garment or something like that might be a little daunting, and they might be less likely to finish it, because like trying to like learn something, like learn new skills on a project that's so large might not necessarily be feasible. I think it depends on the person. I mean, my first project was a blanket, but it was a granny square blanket. Anyway, I digress. So yeah, just kind of thinking about like that. Is it like the technical difficulty? Like, is it actually more difficult? No, but if I'm a beginner and I'm like looking through blogs and looking through, you know, Instagram, trying to see what patterns I'm interested in making or buying, you know, I might go for something that's smaller to begin with. You know, now I'm at the point in my like crochet journey or like experience, if you will, where I primarily make large projects. Like, I make garments and blankets and shawls and things that take a lot of time and a lot of yarn. And I'm comfortable doing that because I have that skill set. But at the beginning, that's not what I was doing. So I do think that that needs to be accounted for, but I do hesitate for a couple of reasons. One, a lot of patterns, and I'm going to talk about garments specifically, come in multiple sizes, as they should, right? And so if you're a size inclusive designer, which everybody should be, but we're not going to talk about that right now. If you're a size inclusive designer, there is a big jump in size from like an extra small to a 5XL. And so I am struggling to figure out how I'm going to address that on the resource, because my initial thought was maybe just have people answer it for like the average size, but I really don't like the implications for a garment saying that like this is the average size, because we're not about that here. This is a size inclusive body positivity space, and I'm not going to say that one size is average. That's not like the vibe or like the message that I want to put forth. And so that gets a little tricky. So I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to address it on the quiz. I think my plan of action for now is going to be to, because what I'm doing is I'm looking at different patterns and like using the resource on those patterns so that I can figure out what the score ranges are going to be for like a beginner or advanced beginner, intermediate, advanced pattern. So I'm going to do that, and I think I'm going to do 2 different versions, one that addresses size and one does not, and see like how much of a difference that actually makes on the overall results. And if it doesn't make much of a difference, I'll leave it out. If it does, then I'm going to have to figure out a way to include it that's fair. Boredom with row repeats with the same stitch in a large project is definitely a factor. Keeping my edges straight in a project larger than a washcloth was difficult until I discovered that stitch markers help. Yes, that was definitely my struggle too. A lot of the first projects I made kind of had that, you know, slant going on, because I was either like not working into the last stitch of the row or like working 2 stitches into the first stitch and like trying to compensate. So definitely understand that. And it was a while before I started using stitch markers. You know, I think that when beginners are just starting off, we don't have a lot of those notions like the stitch markers and like the tape measure and whatever else that really kind of make the craft a little easier and kind of give us the confidence to tackle those larger, more difficult projects. We just have the hook and the yarn because that's all you need to get started. And so, you know, a beginner might not know that stitch markers can help keep their rows straight. And so I think that's another factor that comes into play that might make a larger project more difficult than a smaller project, for sure. So yeah, I did have another project that I wanted to talk about, but seeing as it's already 1:50, I think that I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping up here, because I don't like rushing and getting cut off and things like that. Take another sip of water. So yeah, thank y'all so much for joining me here today. If you were able to join me here live, thank you so much. I had so much fun as always. So the replay is going to be up on IGTV about 10-15 minutes after this, and then the YouTube version is going to be up on Sunday. So I really hope that y'all tune in next week to our Halloween episode. I will be in costume. It's going to be fun, and that will be on Saturday, October 31st at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. If you enjoyed this podcast, I would really appreciate if you could help me out. If you're watching this on IGTV, liking the IGTV video and sharing it to your stories is very helpful, really helps get the word out. And if you're watching this on YouTube, liking the video, commenting on the video, and subscribing to my channel especially really help me out, so that I can spread the fiber arts love and so that more people can find the podcast and enjoy it. So yeah, once again, thank you so much for watching. I had so much fun, and I will, of course, talk to you all throughout the week in my stories and on my feed and things like that, and DMs, whatever. And if not, then I will see you back here next Saturday, same time, same place, October 31st, 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, for our Halloween episode. And hopefully I will have more to talk about on some of these whips that I discussed today. So I will talk to y'all soon. I hope you have a good rest of your day, a good rest of your week. And yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and go now. Happy making. Bye.